When we look at the events of the last couple of weeks, Joel, can you pinpoint a moment, the issue? Is it the recognition question? Is that the one? Is it the blocking of the visa for the member of the Knesset? To you, what has sparked this this series of comments from Prime Minister Netanyahu this week, with the strength of the language that he's using?
Well, I think that you can see that the remarks are indicative of a change that has happened onshore here in Australia. So I was in Canberra for the first session of the new parliament only maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago. And from the start of that fortnightly parliamentary session, there was a giant shift in Australia's policy towards Israel during that very short period of time. So we'll remember Prime Minister Albanese outlined his preference for not pursuing recognition because of its over symbolic nature and wanted to do something that was practical. And then by week's end, that position had changed. On the one hand, you would suggest that Prime Minister Albanese utilised certain images and material coming out from Gaza, certainly about hunger and the accusations of famine. On the one hand, relied upon that information, which it appears as though changed his position. But then when he was called out after he announced the intention to recognise and after the celebration by Hamas, he warned the Australian public that we shouldn't listen to Hamas propaganda, which over the past 22 months, this government has used said propaganda to inform its policy decisions towards Israel. So I would also note that the letter that Prime Minister Netanyahu sent to Prime Minister Albanese was sent before the government announced its decision to block the entry of a sitting and elected member of the Knesset in Simcha Rothman. So in terms of, if you would assume on what the Prime Minister Netanyahu thought of that, he has sent a private letter to the Prime Minister suggesting to him that the Prime Minister's policy, indeed, whether intentional or not, have an impact on the Jewish community. And then no less than a day later, Minister Burke is revoking the visa of a sitting member of the Knesset.
When this week, obviously, there were letters sent to the Prime Minister and to the French leader as well. These efforts have happened, and the government has said they've coordinated with nations like the UK, Canada, France. And when the Prime Minister announced the recognition issue, he did refer to the growing number of illegal settlements, is the way he put it. And then just a few days after he announced it, Minister Smotrich of the Israeli government announced a very controversial settlement, one that had been at the centre of discussions with Condoleezza Rice and the Israeli leadership back in the day. It's controversial because it cuts off the West Bank, essentially, and Minister Smotrich says that it's basically going to end the chances of a Palestinian state in that sense. Do you see why the government is trying with its like-minded countries to put pressure on Israel to maintain the direction towards a two-state solution in regard to that issue specifically?
It's a really, really good question because it really burrows down into the essence of the complexity and the nuances of this. So you raised the issue of the E1 settlement block announcement by Bezalel Smotrich only last week. Now, you also raised in your question that this has been an issue for over 2 decades, including when Condoleezza Rice was working for George Bush Jr. So this E1 project has been announced time and time again, moving through different legislative hurdles inside Israel, but it is usually used as a tool for Israel reacting to the pressure that is being exerting from the outside. So even though this settlement block has been announced time and time again over the past 20 years, there are still no foundations there. There is still nothing that has been laid. So I would suggest that instead of looking at the motivations on the Israeli side as to why they're doing this, I would suggest that if the global leaders, those so-called Western countries that are traditional allies of Israel, that their actions towards Israel can have a consequence of backing Israel into a corner where characters like Minister Smotrich will pull out things and tools within their toolkit like E1 settlement block, which, as I said, has been used time and time again to push back against pressure exerted by the international community. So the essence of answering your question is, Kieran, is that the global community needs to understand that if it moves in one direction, it can have a consequence in Israel as well. And backing Israel into a corner, forcing it to do things whilst it's currently prosecuting a very deadly war. And I don't need to remind you that 3 Israeli soldiers were severely injured in the south of Gaza with a very, very sophisticated ambush just over last night. Hamas is still there in Gaza fighting studiously. So Israel faces a perilous time in its history. I would suggest that Western leaders in the international community, if it altered course just a little bit, it could assist Israel instead of backing it into a corner.
Joel Burnie from AIJAC, thanks for your time as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kieran.